Hi, this is Kendall Boyson, professional life and recovery coach, and you're listening to Encouragementology, the practice of instilling hope. Hi there, thanks for joining me. On this show, we are going to be completing the circle. Loss is inevitable and grieving happens whether we ask for it or not, but happiness is a pursuit. Let's talk about the many losses that trigger the grieving process, whether it's an insignificant disappointment or a loss that shakes us to our core. How we handle loss greatly impacts how we embrace life and our motivation or happiness. You wouldn't want one without the other. Loss can be a cruel teacher, but without loss, one can't truly appreciate happiness and joy. So, no matter where you are along the circle, you need to be here. No one has all the answers to help you through the pain, but without the willingness to uncover more productive alternatives and share your experiences, you will stay stuck. Ready to round the corner on your circle? So we might as well start with the dark and move into the light, right? But why does the grieving process always conjure the ideas of sadness, extended mourning, prolonged grief? In fact, the dictionary's definition of grief is deep sorrow, especially that caused by someone's death. What is sorrow? A feeling of deep distress caused by loss, disappointment, or other misfortune suffered by oneself or others. So if we work backwards, you can feel sorrow and or grief for just about anything. But somehow deep sorrow has always been linked to death. So for anything else, society tends to push a person along the process. Chin up, buttercup. It's not like someone died. Just get over it. And just like that, our feelings of disappointment and even despair are minimalized. Never feel guilty for feelings. Feel gratitude that you have the capability to love and want so deeply that any loss brings about a deep feeling. That doesn't mean you are alone to wallow in your pain, spending all your time at the bottom of the curve. Understanding disappointment or grief and your reaction to it can make all the difference. Walking through pain is the only answer. And how you do that is up to you. So what is grief? I found some really helpful information from thehelpingguide.com to understand dealing with grief. Grief is a natural response to loss. It's the emotional suffering you feel when something or someone you love is taken away. Often, the pain of loss can feel overwhelming. You may experience all kinds of difficult and unexpected emotions, from shock and anger to disbelief, guilt, and profound sadness. The pain of grief can also disrupt your physical health, making it difficult to sleep, eat, or even think straight. These are normal reactions to loss. And the more significant the loss, the more intense your grief will be. Coping with the loss of someone or something you love is one of the biggest challenges. You may associate grieving with the death of a loved one, which is often the case of the most intense type of grief. But any loss can cause grief. Losses like divorce or a relationship breakup, loss of health, losing a job, loss of financial stability, a miscarriage, retirement, death of a pet, loss of a cherished dream, a loved one's serious illness, loss of a friendship, loss of safety after a trauma, or even selling the family home. Even subtle loss in life can trigger a sense of grief. You might grieve after moving away from home, graduating college, or even changing jobs. Whatever your loss, it's personal to you. So don't feel ashamed about how you feel or believe that it's somehow only appropriate to grieve for certain things. If the person, animal, relationship, or situation was significant to you, it's normal to grieve the loss you're experiencing. Whatever the cause of your grief, though there are healthy ways to cope with that pain, in time, that can ease your sadness and help you come to terms with your loss. Maybe even find new meaning and eventually move on with your life. The grieving process is not the same for everyone. Grieving is a highly individual experience. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. How you grieve depends on many factors, including your personality and coping style, your life experience, your faith, and how significant the loss was to you. For everyone, the grieving process can take time. Healing happens gradually. It can't be forced or hurried, and there is no normal timetable for grieving. Some people start to feel better in weeks or months, and for others, the grieving process is measured in years. Whatever your grief experience, it's important to be patient with yourself and allow the process to naturally unfold. Here are some myths and facts about grief and grieving. Myth number 1: the pain will go away faster if you ignore it. The fact is, trying to ignore your pain or keep it from surfacing will only make it worse in the long run. For real healing, it's necessary to face your grief and actually deal with it. Myth number 2: it's important to be strong in the face of loss. The fact is, feeling sad, frightened, or lonely is a normal reaction to loss. Crying doesn't make you weak. You don't need to protect your family or friends by putting on a brave front. Showing your true feelings can help them as well as you. Myth number 3: if you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry about the loss. The fact is, crying is a normal response to sadness, but it's not the only one. Those who don't cry may feel pain just as deeply as others. They may simply have other ways of showing it. Myth number 4: grieving should last about a year. Fact is, there is no specific time frame for grieving. How long it takes differs from person to person. Myth number 5: moving on with your life means forgetting about your loss. The fact is, moving on means you've accepted your loss, but that's not the same as forgetting. You can move on with your life and keep the memory of someone or something you lost as important as it always was. In fact, as you move through life, these memories can become more and more integral to defining the people that we are. While grieving a loss is an inevitable part of life, there are ways to help cope with the pain, come to terms with your grief, and eventually find a way to pick up the pieces and move on with your life. It starts with acknowledging your pain. Not denying your pain, covering your pain, or ignoring it, but acknowledging that you are in pain. Accept that grief can trigger many different and unexpected emotions. Someone might be sad while the other person is angry. Remember, it's a circle. We could be at any point within that circle. Understand that your grieving process will be unique to you. Don't measure your grieving process with someone else, even close in your family going through the same loss. Seek out face-to-face support from people who care about you. It's important to build relationships and share your feelings with someone else. Support yourself emotionally by taking care of yourself physically. If you're exhausted, take time to nurture yourself. Take a nap. If you're feeling lonely and uncommunicative, reach out, be there for someone else, and in turn, you can pick yourself up. Recognize the difference between grief and depression. It's important to be aware of where you are in your stages of grief. Control only goes with a sense of awareness. In 1969, psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross introduced what became known as the 5 stages of grief. These stages of grief were based on her studies of the feelings of patients facing terminal illness, but many people have generalized them to other types of negative life changes and losses, such as death of a loved one or even a breakup. So the 5 stages of grief are denial. This can't be happening to me. Anger. Why is this happening? Who is to blame? Bargaining. Make this not happen and I'll do anything. Depression. I'm too sad to do anything. Acceptance. I'm at peace with what happened. If you're experiencing any of these emotions following a loss, it may help to know that your reaction is natural and that you will heal in time. But not everyone who grieves goes through all of these stages, and that's okay. You do not have to go through each stage in order to heal. In fact, some people resolve their grief without going through any of the stages. And if you do go through these stages of grief, you probably won't experience them in a neat sequential order, but don't worry about that. Don't worry about what you should be feeling or which stage you're supposed to be in. Kubler-Ross herself never intended for these stages to be a rigid framework that applies to everyone who mourns. In her last book before her death in 2004, she said of the 5 stages of grief, they were never meant to help tuck messy emotions into a neat package. These are responses to loss that many people have, but there is not a typical response to loss, as there is no typical loss. Our grieving is as individual as our lives. Be prepared, because grief can be a roller coaster, full of ups and downs, highs and lows. Like many roller coasters, the ride tends to be rougher in the beginning. The lows may be deeper and longer. The difficult periods should become less intense and shorter as time goes by, but it takes time to work through a loss. Even years after a loss, especially at special events such as family weddings or the birth of a child, may still give you those experiences of strong grief. I recently suffered a great loss, the loss of my father. He was diagnosed 20 years ago with Parkinson's and eventually dementia. The last 4 years he spent in a nursing home, and the last 3 months of his life was without family contact due to the COVID restrictions. With the knowledge of his disease and the slow digression of his health, I was able to walk through many of the steps of grieving. I wasn't always aware of where I was when the emotions would get the best of me, but on good days with more clarity, I was able to track my progress. There was no cure for Parkinson's, so my prayers were about good days and the chance to connect when we could effectively communicate. Those days I treasured the most. I was angry at the disease, and at the time it robbed us of so much quality time. I don't struggle with depression, and even though I had sad days, I was able to find gratitude and make the adjustments for this new normal. I thought I was to the point of acceptance until the pandemic kept me from his bedside during his final hours. Then the stages of grief came rushing back like I was right back at the starting line. I spent a lot of time negotiating or bargaining, both in my head and as a plea for help. I was angry and sad. When left with no alternative to change the situation, I turned to the future and the freedom that he would be granted, and I focused on a peaceful transition. I'm now at a place of acceptance, but that doesn't mean I don't take a grief sucker punch every now and then. I'm human, and loss is great when your investment is deep, but so worth it. Since grief is associated with losses other than death, you might find it hard to know if you are in the process or not. So here are some symptoms of grief. Just remember that almost anything that you experience in the early stages of grief is normal, including feeling like you're going crazy, feeling like you're in a bad dream, or questioning your religious or spiritual beliefs. Here are some emotional symptoms of grief: shock and disbelief. Right after a loss, it can be hard to accept what happened. You may feel numb, have trouble believing that the loss really happened, or even deny the truth. If someone you love has died, you may keep expecting them to show up, even though you know they're gone. You might experience sadness. Profound sadness is probably the most universally experienced symptom of grief. You may have feelings of emptiness, despair, yearning, or deep loneliness. You may also cry a lot or feel emotionally unstable. You might have guilt. You may regret or feel guilty about things you did or didn't say or do. You may also feel guilty about certain feelings, like feeling relieved when the person died after a long and difficult illness. After a death, you may even feel guilty for not doing something to prevent the death, even if there was nothing more that you could have done. You could have anger. Even if the loss was nobody's fault, you may feel angry and resentful. If you lost a loved one, you may be angry with yourself, with God, the doctors, or even the person who died for abandoning you. You may feel the need to blame someone for the injustice that was done to you. You might have fear. A significant loss can trigger a host of worries and fears. You may feel anxious, helpless, or insecure. You may even have panic attacks. The death of a loved one can trigger fears about your own mortality, or facing life without that person, or the responsibilities you now face alone. We often think of grief as strictly emotional, but grief often involves physical problems like fatigue, nausea, lowered immunity, weight loss or weight gain, aches and pains, and even insomnia. The pain of grief can often cause you to want to withdraw from others and retreat into your shell. But having the face-to-face support of others is vital to healing from loss. Even if you're not comfortable talking about your feelings under normal circumstances, it's important to express them when you're grieving. Sharing your loss can make the burden of grief easier to carry. But that doesn't mean that every time you interact with friends and family, you need to talk about your loss. Comfort can also come from just being around others who care about you. The key here is not to isolate yourself. Turn to friends and family members. Now is the time to lean on the people who care about you the most, even if you take pride in being strong and self-sufficient. Rather than avoiding them, draw friends and loved ones close and spend time together face to face. This will help you accept the assistance that's being offered to you. Push yourself out of your comfort zone. Show your vulnerability. Often people want to help, but they don't know how, so tell them what you need. Whether it's a shoulder to cry on, or help with funeral arrangements, or just someone to hang out with. If you don't feel you have anyone you can regularly connect with, it's never too late to build new friendships. Accept that many people feel awkward when trying to comfort someone who's grieving. Grief can be a confusing, sometimes even frightening emotion for many people, especially if they haven't experienced a similar loss themselves. They may feel unsure about how to comfort you and end up saying or doing the wrong things. But don't use that as an excuse to retreat into your shell and avoid social contact. If a friend or loved one reaches out to you, it's because they care. Draw comfort from your faith. If you follow a religious tradition, embrace the comfort its mourning rituals can provide. Spiritual activities that are meaningful to you, such as praying, meditating, or going to church for fellowship and solace. If you're questioning your faith in the wake of the loss, talk to a trusted clergy member or someone else from your community. Join a support group. Grief can feel very lonely, even when you have loved ones around you. Sharing your sorrow with others who've experienced similar losses can help. To find a bereavement support group in your area, contact local hospitals, hospice, funeral homes, and counseling centers. Talk to a therapist or grief counselor. If your grief feels like too much to bear, find a mental health professional with experience in grief counseling. An experienced therapist can help you work through intense emotions and overcome obstacles to your grieving. When you're grieving, it's more important than ever to take care of yourself. The stress of a major loss can quickly deplete your energy and emotional reserves. Looking after your physical and emotional needs will help you get through this difficult time. Face your feelings. You can try to suppress your grief, but you can't avoid it forever. In order to heal, you have to acknowledge the pain. Trying to avoid feelings of sadness and loss only prolongs the grieving process. Unresolved grief can also lead to complications like depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and health problems. It can be important to express your feelings in a tangible or creative way. Write about your loss in a journal. If you've lost a loved one, write a letter saying the things you never got to say. Make a scrapbook or photo album celebrating the person's life, or get involved in a cause or organization that was important to your loved one. Try to maintain your hobbies and interests. There's comfort in routine and getting back to the activities that bring you joy and connect you closer to others can help you come to terms with your loss and aid the grieving process. Don't let anyone tell you how to feel, and don't tell yourself how to feel either. Your grief is your own, and no one else can tell you when it's time to move on or get over it. Let yourself feel whatever you feel without embarrassment or judgment. It's okay to be angry, to yell at the heavens, to cry or to not cry. It's okay to laugh and to find moments of joy and let go when you're ready. Plan ahead for grief triggers like anniversaries, holidays, and milestones can reawaken memories and feelings. Be prepared for an emotional wallop and know that it's completely normal. If you're sharing a holiday or life cycle event with other relatives, talk to them ahead of time about their expectations and agree on strategies to honor the person you loved. Look after your physical health. The mind and body are connected. When you feel healthy physically, You'll be better able to cope emotionally. Combat stress and fatigue by getting enough sleep, eating right, and exercising. Don't use alcohol or drugs to numb the pain of grief or to lift your mood artificially. Are you worried that grief won't go away? Do you feel like you're on this endless loop? As time passes, following a significant loss, like the death of a loved one, it's normal for feelings of sadness, numbness, and anger to gradually ease. These and other difficult emotions become less intense as you begin to accept the loss and start to move forward with your life. If you aren't feeling better over time, or your grief is getting worse, it may be a sign that your grief has developed into more of a serious problem, such as complicated grief or major depression. The sadness of losing someone you love never goes away completely, but it shouldn't remain center stage. If the pain of the loss is so constant and severe that it keeps you from resuming your life, you may be suffering from a condition known as complicated grief. Complicated grief is like being stuck in an intense state of mourning. You may have trouble accepting the death long after it has occurred, or be so preoccupied with the person who died that it disrupts your daily routine and undermines your other relationships. Here are some symptoms of complicated grief: intense longing and yearning for your deceased loved one, intrusive thoughts or images of your loved one, denial of the death or a sense of disbelief, imagining that your loved one is still alive, searching for your deceased loved one in familiar places, avoiding things that remind you of your loved one, extreme anger or bitterness over your loss, feeling that life is empty or meaningless. If your loved one's death was sudden, violent, or otherwise extremely stressful or disturbing, complicated grief can manifest as psychological trauma or PTSD. If your loss has left you feeling helpless and struggling with upsetting emotions, memories, and anxiety that won't go away, you may have been traumatized. But with the right guidance, you can make healing changes and move on with your life. Distinguishing between grief and clinical depression isn't always easy, as they share some of the same symptoms, but there are ways to tell the difference. Remember, grief can be a roller coaster. It involves a wide variety of emotions and a mix of good and bad days. Even when you're in the middle of the grieving process, you will still have moments of pleasure or happiness. With depression, on the other hand, the feelings of emptiness and despair are constant. Here are other symptoms that suggest depression and not just grief: an intense, pervasive sense of guilt, thoughts of suicide or a preoccupation with dying, feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness, slow speech and body movements, inability to function at home, work, or school, seeing or hearing things that aren't there. If you're experiencing symptoms of complicated grief or clinical depression, talk to a mental health professional right away. Left untreated, complicated grief and depression can lead to significant emotional damage, life-threatening health problems, and even suicide. But treatment can help you get better. So contact a grief counselor or professional therapist if you feel like life isn't worth living, or you wish you had died with your loved one, blaming yourself for the loss or failing to prevent it, feeling numb and disconnected from others for more than a few weeks. If you're having difficulty trusting others since your loss, or you're unable to perform your normal daily activities. Thank you so much for sticking with me. We are rounding that circle, talking about grieving loss, but on our way to embracing happiness. So when is it okay to embrace happiness? Every single day. Grieving is not a sign of respect, but a natural part of emotional health, just like happiness. It starts with being open and ready to embrace a sense of joy and happiness. If you are racked with guilt, shame, and sadness, you might feel the pull to stay there, not believing that you deserve to smile or feel the warmth of joy. Your awareness of joy may take you seeking the connection. When you feel down and covered in a shroud of despair, it's hard to identify gratitude or recognize joy. Forgiving yourself for loss and your reaction to it is the start. Even if things aren't completely worked out and resolved, you can choose to move on and seek happiness. We've all heard about finding gratitude first thing in the morning. Start your day off in the right direction. Remember, our emotions have a powerful effect on our day. When we're in a good mood, we can take on the world. If we're sad, frustrated, or disappointed, even the smallest obstacle seems insurmountable. We may be unable to fully control our emotions, but we can influence them by focusing our thoughts. Scientific research indicates that a conscious effort to remain optimistic contributes to a feeling of happiness. But that raises a question. How do you remain optimistic in the face of severe challenges? Well, here are 3 quick tips that can make a big difference. I found an article by Justin Bariso for Inc.com. In reality, it will take many of you less than 15 minutes to complete, but be careful not to rush it. And since it influences your outlook on the day, it's suggested to do it first thing in the morning. Are you ready? A 15-minute routine to a happier day. Number 1, find someone to thank. Striving for personal improvement is vital to success, but don't underestimate the value of contentment. In other words, learning to be thankful can help us cultivate a spirit of appreciation, which leads to happiness. So each morning, take a few minutes to consider the positives in your life. But you can take this even a step further. As you ponder what you have to be thankful for, think of those responsible for your happiness, your family, friends, a great boss or colleague, even that friendly barista who always greets you with a smile. Then schedule time in your day to reach out to at least one of these people and tell them how much you appreciate them and why. Because too often our favorite people don't realize just how much they mean to us. Number 2, pick a time to stop working. Happiness is about finding balance. Too much of anything, even something you love, will eventually cause you to burn out. So, whether you work in an office or from home, whether you love your job or you despise it, pick a time you will stop working before you begin your official day. The rest is up to you. Go home to your family, go to work out, or do something you love. Kevin Kruse, author of 15 Secrets Successful People Know About Time Management, has a great tip for making sure you stick to your self-imposed quitting time. View it like a non-negotiable doctor's appointment that you simply can't miss. In other words, when it's time to go, it's time to go. Number 3, plan to give. Science confirms that giving makes you happy. That's why you should plan to give as part of your morning routine. It could be volunteering your time to help someone out, or taking someone to lunch that day, or surprising your significant other or friend or family member with a small gift just because. You'll soon find that in contributing to someone else's happiness, you make yourself happier. And that's what it's called, to win-win. I hope you've been able to pick up some nuggets of inspiration, some positive alternatives to some of these challenges that are inevitable. You know, loss happens every day. Sometimes it's a great loss, like the loss of a loved one. Sometimes it's a simple loss, but it means something to you. So the grieving process, or at least having that sense of grief, will be in your path. How you handle it is up to you. Sometimes you can't handle it all on your own, and that's okay. We are meant to have relationships, supportive relationships with other people. We are not meant to go through these things on our own. So reach out. Find someone you trust to talk to. Notice your pain. Don't deny it, but really notice it. And then be willing to share it with others. Of course, in any good relationship, asking permission to do so is just out of respect. You never know where someone is on their circle. So which loop are they on? Are they on the happiness loop, or are they looping back around and struggling with their own issues? So it might be important to reach out first, find out where someone else is, ask permission to share, and then allow them to embrace you. So often we want to do everything on our own. We want to take on all the pressures of the world and our own. And we want to solve everything and move past it so quickly to show that we're in control. But understanding where you are and taking your time to research the appropriate measures to get through your pain and grief is important. It's not a race. Remember, we're on a journey of self-discovery. This isn't a sprint. I know that sounds cliche, but you taking control of the process is really what's important. So, no matter where you are along the circle of grief and happiness, you can embrace both. Become aware of where you are and what you need to keep going. Life will deliver an ongoing series of ups and downs, but you have the power to move through each stage to acceptance at your own pace. If you want to share encouragementology with a friend who needs to know they are not alone in this journey of self-discovery, you can visit encouragementology.com or anywhere you stream your content to receive this episode and all others. Follow us on Facebook for additional encouragement throughout the week. So I challenge you, notice and explore your emotions to determine what you need. Reach out and embrace help and the joy it brings. You have the power to nurture or push yourself as needed. It's your choice. And I know you can do it. Thank you for listening to Encouragementology with Kendall Boyson, where we find positive ways to handle some of life's challenges.
I stumbled through until the path was clear. That's when I found you and how I wound up here. All I needed was a rock that I could lean on. All you needed was some wind beneath your wings. We might be seeing things from different points of view, but that don't